everyone, it's Morgan again from Archer Review. I'm here today to do part 2 of our Next Generation NCLEX video. In part 1, we discussed an overview of the exam and those important scoring models. So if you missed part 1, make sure to head back on our feed and watch that video first. Today in part 2, we will be reviewing the standalone new item types for NCLEX Next Gen. Let's get started. New items that you see on the NCLEX are going to fall into one of two categories: standalone and case studies. Standalone items, as you know, are items where you're presented with one client, one scenario, you answer the item, and then proceed to the next item. You then have a new client and a new scenario. They stand alone. No item is related to the previous item. And we have quite a few different response types that you could see in NCLEX Next Gen on a standalone item. The first will be drag and drop item responses. And you could see this as a close or as a rationale. In drag and drop close, you'll have a sentence, a phrase, a passage with a few blanks in it. And then you'll have a list of options. We call these options tokens. A word, a phrase, a number, that you'll be asked to drag and drop into the appropriate blank. Now, you have a specified number of responses here because you have to put one token in every blank. So this item will follow that 0-1 scoring rule that we discussed in part 1 of this video. You get a point for each correct response, 0 points for each incorrect response. Now, the other way that you might see drag and drop is in a rationale item. And rationale items ask you to pair information. It's testing that you can identify cause and effect. So, same concept, 2 blanks, you have a list of tokens, and you'll drag and drop. The key with rationale items is that you have to get both correct in order to get 1 point for the item. If you only get 1 correct, you have not appropriately demonstrated that you understand the cause and effect, so you don't get any points for the item. Now, similar to drag and drop, you're also going to see drop down. You can also see this in a close or a rationale, and you can also have drop down tables. The drop down close will look very similar to that drag and drop, but instead of a list of tokens, you have a drop-down menu for each blank that will have 3 to 5 responses, and you'll be asked to select the correct one. In the drop-down rationale, you'll have a sentence, a passage with 2 blanks, and again, a drop-down menu with 3 to 5 options, where you must appropriately identify the cause and effect to get 1 point for the item. Now, in the drop-down table, you'll have a table that lists a certain item from the stem and then asks you to identify the appropriate response that corresponds. For example, in this item, we have groupings where we have the patient's body system. Those are in the rows. And then to the right, potential nursing interventions. You'll select each drop-down and choose the nursing intervention that corresponds with that body system. There are a specified number of responses here because you have to pick 1 item for each row, which means this will follow the 0-1 scoring rule, and you'll get a point for every correct response, 0 points for any incorrect responses. Now, the next way you'll be asked to answer questions on NCLEX Next Gen is called multiple choice. And I bet you guys are already really familiar with multiple choice from nursing school. A simple multiple choice is where you have 4 answers and you have to select 1 response. The exam's only going to let you select 1. If you choose another, it will change your answer to that response. This, of course, follows the 0-1 rule where you get a point if you choose the correct answer and 0 points if you choose the wrong one. We can also have a matrix multiple choice. I like to think of a matrix as a grid. That word makes a little more sense to me. And it's really just a list of multiple choice questions. don't let all of the buttons intimidate you. When you see this grid, you're going to have at least 4 rows, no more than 10, and either 2 or 3 columns. Now, every single row is a question. So in this example that we're looking at, we see an assessment finding for our client, and the columns state improved, no change, or declined. So my first row is asking me the question, does a respiratory rate of 36 indicate that this client has improved, had no change, or declined? I'm going to say that makes them improved, and then I'll move on to the next row, which is the next question. In matrix multiple choice, every row has one answer because each row is just a multiple choice question. You'll get a point for each one you answer correctly, 0 points for each one you answer incorrectly. Then we get in to our multiple response items. In multiple choice, you have to make a choice. Only one answer. In multiple response, you can have as many responses as you want. So these are the items that, except for one exception, follow the plus-minus rule of scoring we discussed, where you'll get a point for correct responses and a point deducted for incorrect responses. The first way we see these questions is the matrix multiple response. Just like the matrix multiple choice we looked at, but each row is now a multiple choice question. So here we see assessment findings in the rows, and the columns outline different potential diagnoses or problems. And I'm going to select which ones could be indicated by that assessment finding. So I look at the information in the stem about the client's appetite. That's my first row. And I check if that could indicate a bowel obstruction. Could it indicate appendicitis? Or could it indicate a ruptured spleen? I could choose 1, 2, or all 3 of those answers. You do have to choose at least one option in each row. But because we don't know exactly how many responses there could be, it follows that plus-minus rule. Again, just think about each of these rows as a select all that apply question. Ask yourself, hey, with my client's appetite, could that be bowel obstruction? Could that be appendicitis? Could that be a ruptured spleen? Check the appropriate ones and then move on to the next row. It's another question. The next way you can have multiple response is in that select all that apply question format. Instead of a big matrix with multiple questions, it's just one question. You could have 5 to 10 options. 1 could be correct, a few could be correct, all 10 could be correct. This will also follow that plus-minus scoring rationale, where you get a point for each correct response and a deduction of a point for each incorrect response. Now, the next item is the exception to that plus-minus scoring rule. It's called multiple response select N. Select N means that the stem of the question is going to actually tell you how many items to choose. For example, in this demo question, we see select 4 findings that require immediate follow-up. So I know I'm going to pick 4. Since I have a specified number of answer responses, the multiple response select N's follow the 0-1 scoring rule, where I get a point for each correct response, but I don't get a deduction for incorrect responses. The last type of multiple response is called a grouping question. It looks kind of like the grid, but what you see is that you have groupings. So in this demo question, it's body systems. We have a group for neurologic, a group for respiratory, and a group for cardiovascular. These questions will have a minimum of 2 groupings and a maximum of 5 groupings. And each group has somewhere between 2 and 4 options. It's going to be the same number of options for all of the groups. Basically, each group is a multiple response question. You look at the body system, neurologic, that's your first group. You have 4 options there, and you select all the appropriate responses. You do have to choose at least one option from each group, but it could be one option, two options, three options, four options, okay? Each group is a multiple response item. This is also scored with that plus minus rule, since we don't know exactly how many answer responses there will be. That's all of our multiple response items. The next thing that you could see is called highlight items. I've also heard this called extended hotspot. And there's two ways they ask for this response, either in text or in a table. In the text, you would have a passage, a nursing note, a client assessment, and when you move your cursor over that text, you'll see that it's what we call tokenized. You can click on certain phrases from that text. And you're going to have to read the stem of the question and click on the appropriate parts. For example, what assessment findings from this nursing note require follow-up? And you'll click on the text. There's going to be a max of 10 options here, and you can select and unselect to change your answer as you go. You can also see this highlighting in table form. It works in exactly the same way where those phrases are tokenized, so you can click and unclick and highlight the parts of the table required for the item. Now, the next type of item is called a bow tie. And this is really just a very fancy drag and drop question. You have 5 spaces. 2 are going to be for actions to take. 1 in the middle for a condition that the patient is likely experiencing. And 2 on the right for parameters you want to monitor. Below those empty spaces, you'll have text boxes that you can drag and drop into the bow tie. You have to fill every single slot. So we know there are 5 responses possible in a bow tie question. That means it follows that 0-1 rule where you get a point for every correct action, no points for incorrect options that you've dropped into that bow tie. The last item is what the test writers are calling a trend item. And all they mean by that is that the item is requiring you to review and analyze information over time. So you might be asked to review a nursing note, assessment findings, vital signs, labs, evaluate a change in a patient. And they can ask you to respond to that information with any of the item types that we just discussed. A multiple response, a matrix, a table, highlighting, it's all fair game. Those are the standalone items that you'll see on the NCLEX. Follow us at Archer Review to join with part 3, where I'm going to be going over the case studies. You can find our website online at archerreview.com and follow us on social at Archer NCLEX. I'm Morgan, and I'll see you next time for part 3.